Ethan lounged in the comfort of his kitchen, relishing the rare luxury of a tranquil day off. He had mapped out the day in his head, a chance to decompress, maybe fire up the grill, and savor a peaceful afternoon with his wife, Lila. She was out at her usual yoga class, a new daily ritual she'd recently embraced. Ethan didn't mind her commitment to it. If it made her feel better, that was enough for him. Today, he thought, had the makings of something special. He pictured them unwinding in the backyard with cold drinks, the aroma of sizzling steaks wafting from the barbecue, and their favorite music playing softly in the background to set the mood. A genuine sense of happiness filled him, a rarity amidst his demanding work schedule and the endless grind of daily life. As he contemplated which sides might best complement the barbecue, Ethan noticed a car pulling up to the house. Perfect timing, he thought, already picturing Lila walking in, cheerful and ready to enjoy the day he had envisioned. But when she stepped out of the car, his mood wavered. She wasn't alone. A young man, probably in his mid-20s, exited the passenger side and followed Lila up the walkway. Confusion prickled at the edges of Ethan's contentment, but he brushed it aside, assuming Lila had given a classmate a ride home. When Lila opened the door, her gaze met his, and she paused, an almost imperceptible hesitation in her step. She greeted him warmly, though something in her tone felt off. Then, gesturing toward the young man, she introduced him. "This is Victor," she said, a subtle smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "We met at yoga. He's my partner." The word lingered in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Ethan stood, extending a hand toward Victor, but the man's casual demeanor and overconfident air put Ethan on edge. He was just about to question Lila when she motioned for them to sit. "I think we need to talk," Lila said, her voice calm and measured, as though she were discussing the weather. Ethan's unease deepened as she began explaining that Victor wasn't merely a yoga acquaintance. According to Lila, they shared a spiritual bond, one that apparently required a physical dimension to fully explore. Ethan's mind reeled, each of her carefully chosen words adding to his bewilderment. Finally, unable to take her evasiveness any longer, he interrupted. "Lila," he said, his voice tight. "Just say it outright. What exactly are you trying to tell me?" She met his eyes with unsettling composure. "Victor is my lover, Ethan. But it's not what you're thinking. It's not serious. He's someone I connect with, someone I enjoy spending time with." Her words were disturbingly nonchalant, as if this revelation was meant to be understood and accepted without protest. She reached out to place a hand over his, her touch unsettlingly reassuring. "You're my number one," she added, a faintly patronizing smile creeping across her face. "This is just a part of who I am now. I need you to accept it." The words hit Ethan like a freight train. He sat frozen, a storm of emotions churning inside him, shock, anger, disbelief. But he remained outwardly composed, his years of stoicism guiding him to hold back any immediate reaction. "You're telling me Victor is your lover," he began, his voice steady but clipped, "and this is all for some kind of spiritual growth?" Lila nodded serenely. "Yes, exactly. This is part of a journey I'm on, a deeper connection, something beyond just the physical. Victor helps me grow spiritually through tantric practice. It's transformative." Her tone was unnervingly casual, like a teacher explaining a lesson to a student. Before Ethan could speak, Victor interjected. "Tantra is about energy and connection," he said, his tone practiced and deliberate. "Sometimes, physical interaction is necessary to unlock that energy. It's a form of meditation." Ethan clenched his jaw, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. He took a deep breath, determined not to explode. "So you're saying you're helping Lila with her energy," he said, his voice calm but tinged with sarcasm. "And I'm supposed to just, what? Accept that my wife is sharing a close physical connection with someone else because it's for her so-called spiritual progress?" "Ethan," Lila replied evenly, her patience clearly rehearsed. "I'm being honest with you. which is why I brought Victor here. I don't want lies or secrets between us. I want transparency in our marriage. Yes, Victor and I are physically intimate, but it's about growth, not lust. This is a necessary part of my feminine energy's evolution. Victor nodded along, as if affirming a rehearsed script. Ethan couldn't help but scoff. Let me get this straight, he said, his voice laced with disbelief. By your logic, if I were to find a woman, bring her home, and say she was part of my spiritual journey, you'd be fine with that? Lila's face hardened. Ethan, that's completely different. If you brought someone home, it would just be about physical desire or revenge, not spiritual growth. What Victor and I share is meaningful, not trivial. Ethan barked a short, bitter laugh, shaking his head. So, what now? Does Victor stay the night here, in our bedroom, as part of this growth? You're twisting my words, Lila replied, her voice carrying a note of exasperation. If I wanted to cheat, I'd have done it in secret. I'm telling you the truth because I respect our marriage. Ethan took a slow, deep breath, his expression unreadable. Fine, he said, his voice carefully measured. Then tell me, how long has this so-called spiritual practice been going on? Her response was instant. We just started, which is why I'm telling you now. She gazed at him expectantly, as though waiting for applause for her so-called honesty. Now everything can be open between us, she said, her tone almost self-congratulatory. Ethan's lips curled into a bitter smirk. So, let me get this straight, he replied, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I'm supposed to be fine with sharing my wife with another man because it's spiritual. He shook his head, disbelief etched across his face. Lila, do you even realize how absurd this sounds? Ethan, please, she said, her voice softening to what she probably thought was a soothing tone. You're my favorite husband. My number one. I'm just asking you to accept this new practice. It's only once a week. The casualness of her words churned his stomach, a wave of nausea rising as he fought to maintain his composure. Ethan forced a tight smile, giving a curt nod. I need a moment. I'll be right back, he said, his voice controlled but strained. He excused himself, retreating to the sanctuary of the bathroom. Inside, he splashed his face with cold water, as if trying to wash away the surreal absurdity of the situation. But when he looked in the mirror, his reflection stared back, unyielding and furious. My God, he thought, gripping the edge of the sink tightly. She's asking me to accept her lover as part of our lives, as if this is all completely normal. His fists clenched at his sides, anger boiling over. For a fleeting moment, he wanted to punch the mirror, to vent the growing storm inside him. But he stopped himself, taking a long, deep breath. Not yet, he told himself firmly. Staring into his reflection, a newfound resolve began to take shape. I can't accept this. But I won't let them walk away unscathed either. A dark determination flickered in his eyes. They think they can twist love and loyalty into this game. Fine. Let's see how they like the taste of their own medicine. Still trembling with restrained fury, Ethan rummaged through the medicine cabinet, searching for something to calm his nerves. Instead, his fingers brushed against a bottle of laxatives. He paused, his gaze lingering on the small plastic container. A wicked idea began to take root, spreading through his mind like wildfire. A chuckle escaped his lips as he envisioned the poetic justice. Instant karma. The phrase rang in his head like a mantra. He could already picture Lila and Victor, smug and self-satisfied, blissfully unaware of what awaited them. Slipping the bottle into his pocket, Ethan straightened up, smoothing his expression into one of calm resignation. With a deep breath, he left the bathroom, ready to set his plan in motion. Back in the kitchen, he plastered on a worn, conciliatory smile. Lila, he began, his voice measured, this is a lot to process. But you know, I've always wanted you to be happy. If this path is what fulfills you, I'll do my best to support you. Lila's expression softened, her shoulders relaxing as relief washed over her face. Thank you, Ethan. I knew you'd understand, she said, her voice filled with gratitude. Victor, too, looked visibly relieved, a small smile flickering at the edges of his mouth. Perfect, Ethan thought, concealing his satisfaction. Why don't we sit down, have some coffee, and talk this through, he suggested, moving toward the cupboard. That sounds great, Lila agreed, her eagerness palpable. Victor nodded, adding, yeah, sure, sounds good. Moving to the counter, Ethan busied himself with the coffee, his expression composed but his mind racing. He needed a way to get them out of the room, just long enough to execute his plan. Inspiration struck as he prepared the cups. Turning back toward the table, he feigned clumsiness, tipping one mug so the steaming liquid spilled across Victor's lap. Oh no! Ethan exclaimed, his tone laced with mock horror. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to. It's just, this whole situation has me a bit on edge, you know. Meeting my wife's spiritual partner and all, he offered a sheepish grin. Victor jumped up, frantically brushing the hot liquid off his pants. It's okay, he said, though his voice betrayed a mix of annoyance and discomfort. I feel terrible, Ethan continued, his tone apologetic. Why don't you grab a pair of my sweatpants? You shouldn't have to sit around in those. He turned to Lila with a pleading look. Can you help him find something in a top drawer of my closet? Lila nodded quickly. Of course. We'll be right back, she said, leading Victor down the hall. The moment they were out of sight, Ethan's expression hardened. Moving swiftly, he poured fresh cups for Lila and Victor. Pulling the laxative bottle from his pocket, he shook a generous amount into each cup, stirring with precision. Once done, he set the mugs back in place and resumed his seat, carefully masking his anticipation. When Lila and Victor returned, Ethan greeted them with a relaxed, slightly embarrassed smile. They took their seats and began sipping the coffee, oblivious to the hidden ingredient. Ethan forced another sheepish grin. I'm really sorry about earlier, Victor. Just nerves, I guess. Victor waved it off, attempting to sound understanding. Hey, it's fine. No harm done. As the conversation drifted into small talk, Ethan leaned back in his chair, his eyes flickering to the clock. Just wait, he thought, a flicker of dark satisfaction breaking through his stoic demeanor. Feigning earnestness, he suggested, you know, I was planning to barbecue today. Since we're all here, why don't we enjoy it together? Make it a fresh start of sorts. Lila's face lit up, and she reached for Ethan's hand with a smile. That's a great idea. It's exactly what we need. Victor hesitated, rubbing his stomach. I don't really eat meat. I try to stick to a plant-based diet. Not a problem, Ethan replied smoothly. We'll just stop by the store and grab some vegetarian options for you. It'll be perfect. Lila beamed at his thoughtfulness. Thank you, Ethan. That's so kind of you. Deep down, Ethan suppressed a smirk. Let the games begin. As they prepared to leave for the store, he sipped his own coffee, watching the clock and anticipating the moment his plan would unfold. Soon, Ethan thought, a dark sense of satisfaction spreading through him. Very soon, the real fun begins. Rising from the table, he forced a pleasant smile. I'll go get the car out of the garage while you two finish your coffee, he offered casually, heading for the door. Once outside, he paused to gather himself, reveling in the quiet triumph of his plan inching closer to fruition. After a moment, he stepped back inside, adopting a concerned expression. Lila, he called, holding out his hand with a slight grimace. Looks like I've got a flat tire. Can I take your keys instead? We'll use your car, and I'll drive. Without hesitation, Lila tossed him her keys. Of course, she said, barely giving it a second thought. Ethan pocketed them with a sense of smug satisfaction. No way I'm putting my car at risk, he thought. And if this plays out the way I hope, they're going to need a fast getaway. Once everyone was settled in Lila's car, her and Victor in the back seat, Ethan in the driver's seat, he began the drive to the supermarket at a leisurely pace. The conversation was intentionally light, steering far from the earlier tension, as he silently counted the minutes. 7 minutes in, Ethan noticed Lila shifting uncomfortably. Victor, too, was beginning to fidget beside her. A subtle smirk tugged at Ethan's lips. "Ethan," Lila said abruptly, her voice tight with urgency, "can you speed up? We need to get there sooner rather than later." Victor chimed in, squirming in his seat. "Yeah, man. Faster would be good." Ethan gave a slow nod, stalling just a little longer as they grew visibly restless. Another few blocks passed before Lila's tone sharpened. "Ethan, for God's sake, step on the gas." Suddenly, a new idea struck him, a wicked twist to his plan that he hadn't anticipated but couldn't resist. Pressing down on the gas pedal momentarily, he eased off just as quickly, furrowing his brow as he glanced at the dashboard. "Something's not right," he muttered, peering into the rearview mirror with mock concern. Lila leaned forward, her tone exasperated. "Forget the engine, Ethan. Just drive. We need to get there, now." Feigning frustration, he pulled the car to the side of the road. "Hold on," he said, popping the hood and stepping out. "Let me check it out." Once outside, Ethan discreetly hit the central lock button on the fob, trapping them inside. After a few moments of fake tinkering, he looked up, putting on a puzzled expression. Lila was already banging on the window, her voice rising. "Ethan. Unlock the doors. Now." He held up the key fob, pressing it repeatedly without actually unlocking anything. "Weird," he said, his tone full of faux confusion. "It's not working. Just hold on a second. Why did you even lock it in the first place?" Lila yelled, her voice verging on panic. Ethan pretended to fumble with the keys before deliberately dropping them near the storm drain. Bending over, he peered inside, shaking his head in feigned horror. "No," he called back, his voice carrying just the right amount of dread. They slipped right into the drain. Lila's eyes widened in realization as Victor's discomfort escalated into full-blown alarm. Ethan stood up, throwing his hands up helplessly, but a hint of a smirk betrayed his inner glee. Victor suddenly doubled over, clutching his stomach. "Oh no," he groaned, beads of sweat forming on his pale face. "My stomach. What's wrong?" Lila asked, her concern quickly shifting to her own cramping abdomen. A sharp pang made her wince. Outside, Ethan suppressed a laugh as he watched them squirm in growing distress. "Ethan." Lila screamed, her voice now desperate. "Open the damn doors." Feigning innocence, Ethan tilted his head. "What's the big rush?" he asked, shrugging with exaggerated casualness. "We could just call roadside assistance, you know." Inside, Victor's face turned ghostly white as he doubled over further. "Ethan," he shouted, clutching his midsection. "I need a bathroom. Now." "Oh, so it's a bathroom emergency," Ethan replied, his tone light and teasing. "Why didn't you say so? Let me just find something to break the glass with." He began searching the ground leisurely, every second stoking his satisfaction. "Ethan." Lila pounded on the window, her panic mounting. "We need out now." "Sure thing," he said with a cheerful thumbs up. "Just give me a second, although, you know, I read somewhere that calling 911 for non-emergencies can get you a hefty fine. We wouldn't want that, would we?" Inside the car, chaos erupted. Lila, now frantic, scanned the interior until her eyes landed on the windshield. "Victor. Just kick it out. We'll replace it later." Victor nodded, grimacing through his agony as he braced his feet against the glass. With all his strength, he shoved. But instead of shattering the windshield, something else escaped. A loud, unmistakable noise followed by an even more mortifying stain spreading across his borrowed sweatpants. Outside, Ethan watched, his face turning red from the effort of holding back laughter. Lila gasped, her expression a mix of horror and disbelief. Victor, no. Victor's head hung in pure shame, his hands futilely trying to cover the evidence of his predicament. But before Lila could fully process the disaster unfolding beside her, she doubled over with a grimace, her own situation spiraling out of control. No, 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 she muttered, clutching her stomach as she squirmed helplessly in her seat. Ethan, unable to contain himself any longer, burst out laughing. He leaned against the car, tears streaming down his face as he gasped between fits of laughter. Wow, you two have really connected on a deeper level, he managed to choke out. Inside the car, Lila and Victor turned to glare at him, their mortification complete. Their faces were a mix of rage and sheer humiliation, but neither Lila nor Victor was in any position to argue. Meanwhile, Ethan doubled over with laughter, watching them trapped in their karmic nightmare. As another wave of cramps racked their bodies, both of them clutched their stomachs, groaning in pain. Ethan couldn't help but chuckle. Looks like you two are achieving a whole new level of spiritual connection, he quipped, crossing his arms in mock admiration. Though I'd guess the path to enlightenment isn't supposed to smell this pungent. Inside the car, Lila and Victor were in full-blown panic. Liquid seeped from beneath them, spreading across the seat and creating an unspeakable mess. The stifling, suffocating stench filled the car as they pounded on the window, desperate. Ethan, for the love of everything holy, do something. Lila shrieked, her voice rising in panic. Ethan sighed theatrically, pretending to mull it over. Well, I suppose I could give you a bit of relief, he said, walking to the driver's side window. After some effort and teamwork, more from their side than his, they managed to crack the window open by a single inch. The moment the seal broke, a thick, nauseating cloud of foul-smelling air surged out, hitting Ethan square in the face. He jumped back, gagging and waving his hand in front of his nose. Whoa! Did I just open a portal to the underworld? He exclaimed. I knew you two were on a spiritual growth journey, but I didn't think it involved summoning sulfuric fumes from the abyss. Lila and Victor could only groan in response, their faces drained of any remaining dignity. The small gap provided minimal ventilation, leaving them stewing in their miserable, humid predicament. Ethan took a few steps back, stifling another laugh as he watched the chaos unfold. Realizing they were too far gone to climb out on their own, Ethan pulled out his phone and dialed emergency services. Hi, yes, I've got a bit of an emergency, he said, his voice dripping with faux concern. Glancing at the car, he added, there are a couple of people locked inside a vehicle, and, well, they're having a rather unfortunate gastrointestinal episode. When he hung up, Lila leaned forward as much as she could, glaring daggers at him through the barely opened window. You did this, Ethan. I know you did. Raising his eyebrows in mock surprise, Ethan replied, now, Lila, that's quite the accusation. I thought yogic enlightenment was all about accepting your karma, not blaming others for it. He shrugged, his smirk widening. Looks to me like the universe is just sending a message. You know, a little payback for bad behavior. Victor, utterly defeated, managed a feeble whisper. Please, Ethan. Ethan gave him a pitying look. You know, Stan, it's going to be tough to build spiritual connections with people who can't even hold it together. He chuckled, pinching his nose. This is going to leave a lasting impression on a lot more than just those seats. Inside the car, Lila and Victor had completely broken down. Tears streamed down their faces as they gasped for what little breathable air remained. Clinging to each other in shared misery, they appeared utterly defeated. Outside, Ethan tried to maintain a straight face as the wail of sirens grew louder and flashing lights approached. Within moments, the scene was swarming with first responders, police officers, paramedics, and even a few firefighters. One of the officers approached Ethan, his professional demeanor barely holding as he fought back a grin. "Sir, can you explain what's going on here?" Ethan nodded solemnly, gesturing to the car. "It's a bit of a situation," he said, feigning helplessness. "I got out of the car, and the lock jammed. Then the keys slipped right into that storm drain." He pointed at the grate with a defeated shrug. "And now, well, they're kind of stuck." The officer peered into the car and blinked, taking in the sight of Lila and Victor. Both were writhing in discomfort, their tear-streaked faces pressed against the windows. As paramedics and firefighters moved closer, a few quiet snickers escaped despite their efforts to stay professional. One firefighter muttered, "Guess it's time to break the glass and ventilate the situation before we lose someone in there." He pulled out a tool to crack the window, but the paramedics nearby were already grimacing and covering their noses. With one decisive whack, the firefighter shattered the glass. Instantly, a wave of noxious air billowed out, forcing everyone to stagger back. One paramedic gagged, nearly retching. "Good Lord. Smells like. I don't even want to guess." Ethan stepped back as well, waving his hands dramatically in front of his face. "Looks like they found an earthly way to hit rock bottom," he said, his grin widening as the first responders exchanged glances, barely able to contain their laughter. Carefully, the firefighters and paramedics worked to lift Lila and Victor out of the car, one by one. As they gasped for fresh air, their faces showed a mix of relief and utter humiliation. The rescue crew struggled to maintain composure, their smirks poorly hidden. Standing to the side, Ethan crossed his arms and observed, savoring every karmic second. "Don't worry, Lila," he called out, his voice dripping with mock reassurance. "This is just part of the spiritual journey, right? Growth through suffering, or something like that." Lila and Victor shot him glares of pure venom, but they were too humiliated to respond. Ethan simply smiled, watching as they were loaded into the ambulance, their mortifying ordeal complete. Lila and Victor were finally pulled from the car, but the sight that greeted the first responders was far worse than anyone could have anticipated. Both of them were drenched in a revolting, foul-smelling sludge. Their clothes were smeared with streaks of misery, and their faces bore the unmistakable marks of dried tears and utter defeat. As they stumbled out, the responders exchanged glances, their professionalism stretched thin as they struggled to keep straight faces. One paramedic, unable to hold back his curiosity, raised an eyebrow and asked, "How on earth did you two get this messy?" Victor, his complexion ashen, opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He closed it again, his gaze dropping in shame, avoiding eye contact entirely. Lila, her cheeks flushing a deep red, fumbled with her shirt, a feeble attempt to cover the mess that had overtaken her. She glanced at the paramedic with a pleading look, but no explanation seemed sufficient, or possible. The paramedic shook his head, suppressing a chuckle, and handed Lila a single sanitizing wipe. It was almost comically inadequate for the disaster she was facing, but it was all he could offer in the moment. Lila took it reluctantly, her eyes welling up with fresh tears. As the responders helped load Lila and Victor into the ambulance, smirks began to break through the veneer of professionalism among the team. Ethan stood at a distance, watching the entire spectacle unfold with quiet satisfaction. Pulling out his phone, he calmly called a taxi, ready to make his exit. Before climbing into the cab, he threw one last look at Lila and Victor, who could only glare back weakly, their exhaustion and humiliation leading them too drained to fight. Ethan's face was a perfect mask of feigned sympathy as he said, "I'd love to stick around, but I really need to clear my head after all of this." With that, he gave them a small, mocking wave and disappeared into the night. Once home, Ethan moved methodically, packing his things with a level of calm he hadn't felt in years. Breathing deeply and freely, he zipped his suitcase shut and sat down at his laptop. A few keystrokes later, he was browsing for the best divorce attorney in town. "This marriage is far too dirty to clean up," he thought, a small, satisfied smile playing on his lips. That evening, As the weight of the fiasco settled over her, Lila tried calling Ethan. She dialed his number again and again, her hands trembling with a mix of rage and humiliation. But each call went unanswered, leaving her staring at her phone in growing panic. The sound of Ethan's laughter echoed in her mind, taunting her as she spiraled between thoughts of revenge and desperate explanations she wished he could hear. The next day, still reeling from her disastrous, spiritual experience with Victor, Lila returned home. No amount of fresh air had washed away the shame clinging to her like a second skin. Determined to confront Ethan, she pulled into the driveway, mentally rehearsing every word she planned to say. Her arguments were prepared, her excuses polished. But when she stepped inside, her breath caught in her throat. The house was eerily empty. Room by room, she wandered, her heart sinking as she realized Ethan's things were gone. The closets were stripped bare. The drawers sat open, empty. It was as though he had vanished completely, leaving only the hollow echo of his absence. In the kitchen, her eyes landed on a single note lying on the counter. She recognized Ethan's neat, deliberate handwriting instantly. The note contained only 3 words, "Meet me in court." The message hit her like a punch to the gut. She clutched the paper tightly, her stomach churning as the full weight of what had happened pressed down on her. A chill ran through her as she realized Ethan had planned this all along, his meticulous revenge unfolding perfectly. A few days later, her worst fears were confirmed. A thick packet arrived in the mail. Inside were divorce papers, meticulously prepared and signed by one of the toughest attorneys in town. Ethan had moved swiftly, giving her no chance to respond, no opportunity to prepare. As she flipped through the pages, her hands shaking, she saw how thoroughly he'd anticipated her every move. His revenge wasn't just petty, it was calculated, deliberate, and utterly devastating. Sitting alone in the cold, empty house, the divorce papers spread out before her, Lila felt the sting of karma hit harder than she ever thought possible. Ethan hadn't just left her in humiliation, he'd left her with a stark reminder that actions have consequences. Now, as she stared into the void of her own choices, she realized this was her reckoning. One that would haunt her far longer than she could bear.